Good morning, everyone. And for those who are dialing across the world, good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, Talking Cyber Security Plus. My name is Michelle, and I'm part of the marketing team here at DDLS, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly run through some housekeeping. This webinar is in listen mode only and will run for approximately 45 minutes with 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. If you have any questions, please type them into the control panel on the bottom of your screen and we'll address this at the end. This webinar will be recorded and distributed to all attendees at a later date. Today, I am pleased to be joined by our very own cybersecurity lead, Jeremy Daly, who will be hosting our very special guest, Dr. James Stanger, who is CompTIA's Chief Technology Evangelist, and also our very own most popular and in-demand cybersecurity instructor, Cremen. I'd now like to hand it over to Jeremy.
Thank you, Michelle, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. As Michelle said, I am joined by Dr. James Stanger, who is CompTIA's Chief Technology Evangelist, and Cremen, who is DDLS Cybersecurity Technical Instructor. James and Louis, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good to be here, man. Thanks.
James, I believe you're dialing in from not only yesterday, but from Washington State over in the US.
Yeah, I'm time traveling and traveling. So greetings from Washington State. I'm on the left part of the US there. So on the Pacific side, put it that way. So good to be here.
Fantastic, thank you. And Louis, you're in New South Wales, so you didn't have to do anything but join, so thanks.
No, but it's a bit cold here today. It's a bit of a cold one.
It certainly is, it certainly is. So today we're going to talk about Security Plus from CompTIA and specifically the new version of Security Plus SY0601. Security Plus is recognised as one of the first certifications that a candidate should earn. It establishes the core knowledge required of any cybersecurity role and provides a springboard to intermediate level cybersecurity jobs. It covers the most core technical skills in risk assessment and management, incident response, forensics, enterprise networks, hybrid cloud operations, and security controls, ensuring high performance on the job. It's also the only baseline cybersecurity certification emphasizing hands-on practical skills, ensuring the security professional is better prepared to problem solve a wider variety of today's complex issues that they're being faced with. It also boasts over 500,000 individuals globally who have earned the Security Plus, which is a huge number. And so that should really come as no surprise that more job roles and organizations are turning to Security Plus to supplement baseline cyber skills, enabling organizations to improve baseline security readiness and incident response. With DDLS, we've certainly seen it with some of our clients who are putting IT teams through Security Plus to have that baseline security readiness. So today we're going to have a look at how Security Plus has changed to align to today's challenges and outcomes faced by cybersecurity professionals. So let's have a look at what's new. So we've seen a big increase in cyber attacks. More roles now are tasked with bridging the gap between improving baseline security readiness and incident response to address today's threats. Security Plus reflects these skills that are relevant to these job roles and help prepare candidates to be more proactive and in preventing that next attack. So James, I'm going to ask you here, I guess looking at the new Security Plus, first of all, why did it get an update and what are some of the major changes?
One of the reasons why it updated is because the attackers are doing different things and therefore the defenders have to respond. That's the first thing. We've also seen proper, I should say, true adoption of the cloud, for example. So in other words, the attack surface has changed and the attacking methods have changed. So there's two reasons why you've seen major changes. We've been talking about the cloud. I mean, Louis, how long have we been talking about the cloud and Jeremy, but versus actually adopting it? I would argue in the last about 5 years is where you've seen actual serious adoption across the board, especially by small businesses. Before it was just a lot of talk. And that's one of the reasons why it's changed, I think. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, there was obviously, this idea that the cloud is someone else's computer. Yeah, that was the joke,
Yeah.
right? That's every T-shirt has that. Whereas now, that many, how many years later, the cloud is almost essential to a lot of things that we do, and there's some things we can't do unless, of course, we adopt some sort of cloud platform, whether it be, a some sort of service, some sort of software that we have there, or if we are using something that's infrastructure related. There's a lot more places, a lot more larger players, not just small business, but a lot of larger players that are sort of going to the cloud as well.
And a part of that change is people will use that term digital transformation, and I'm not crazy about, because it's a term that a lot of nonsense gets put behind. But I will say this, that companies are truly embracing technology to change what they're doing. Okay, so that's a definition of pretty good one of digital transformation. My point is single sign-on, for example, okay, has become a major thing and it's been around a long time, but it's now available to smaller companies, not massive, huge companies, but to smaller companies. That's another reason why, for example, architecture and design has come in. To that 21%. We need workers who understand how all of this stuff works, from logins to working with the cloud, that could be on premise, but all of those different ways to authenticate and do access control across multiple platforms. That's, I think, another major, change that we've seen in the Security Plus certification. Another thing, when it comes to attacks and vulnerabilities, we know what a lot of those attacks are, right? Whether they be 0 days that we don't know the details, but we have some idea. But ransomware, social engineering, all those things have been fairly consistent all along. But what we've noticed is that there's an increasing volume and an increasing variety of those different types of attacks. And that's why we've emphasized the attacks, the threats, and the vulnerability side of things. I think another thing I like to point out, and Louis, we could talk about this a bit. You'll notice there's an entirely new domain in there. We talk about things as domains, and you're seeing each of those domains. I'm not a great counter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. So I deal with certifications all day long. So there's 5 domains in here. Most of our certs will have 4 and 5, maybe 6, but usually just 4 and 5. But that new domain there in governance. There's a big buzz phrase out there called GRC. I guess it's not a buzz phrase, is it? It's buzz.
Buzz TLA.
Buzz,
yeah. Their acronym.
Yes, buzz acronym, yeah. So, but governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, it's a big deal right now. And the reason why is that more organizations are having to comply with various standards out there, whether they be the ISO 27000, X's, GDPR for those who have to do business with the European Union, what's left of it, just kidding. But Australian standards, California standards. I live just above California, or more, Oregon gets in the way there. But California standards are things that are found nationwide. Let's put it this way: the PCI standards. You guys know what I'm talking about, Louis. The payment card industry. They have standards. If you're a company that takes credit cards, you have to comply to their standards. Many of these things have been around a long time, but let's put it this way: everybody's taking them seriously now, and even more seriously. And so, I think you're seeing a growing up, moving away from Louis. You and I were talking earlier. You mentioned cowboy mentality. I just wrote an article here a couple of months ago about cowboy IT is what tends to run people into a lot of problems. And what we're seeing is IT and security workers kind of putting down the cowboy hat or the white hat or any of that stuff. I'm using the word stuff a lot lately, and those things, but really getting more buttoned down and business-like. And because they're being brought into the boardroom, they're being brought, they're talking to the CEO. All of those reasons, I think, are why you've seen some of these changes, major changes to Security Plus.
We're also seeing some of the change in the technology and it being more accessible as well. The ability to have privileged access management, for instance, where we can have sort of temporary once-off access for certain types of administrators, rather than sort of giving someone admin privileges for every server in the entire organization. You go through a process to get admin access. You have a one-time password. You don't even know what that password is. Everything you do is recorded. You only use it for a certain period of time. There is now technology that can help back up some of the policies that we want to have in place for organizations. And so I think that's the other reason we're sort of seeing that lack of cowboy mentality, because now these people, these IT workers, can do their job at the same time as being secure. Whereas previously they were sort of responsible for all the keys in the kingdom, but now they sort of have set that up. They can now set up another system so they can that those keys of the kingdom can be released when needed, rather than sort of have access to them all the time.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think that's part of the whole idea of democratization of IT and that sort of thing, or it's just that it's just that much easier to get to use this stuff? I mean, with COVID, we realized that technology has been so, in a sense, so far ahead of us. We just haven't been taking advantage of it.
Yeah, there's certainly a part of that, but the other part of that is that we've looked at the attacks. And the attacks have come in, through getting some sort of administrative access. If we can remove that for as many people as possible, again, that sort of least privilege model, then it's much harder for an attacker to perform whatever they need to do. And so I think the attacks and the threats have led, to coming up with solutions to those attacks, which then has led to a lot more places adopting it, which then made it cheaper and made it more accessible and made it more sort of an industry standard to try to restrict administrative privileges, as one example. We've got a sort of a baseline, a sort of guide from the Australian Signals Directorate called the Essential 8, which is sort of the top 8 controls that are sort of recommended for all Australian organisations to have. Okay. And one of those is restricting administrative privileges. And they've got sort of different maturity levels. So it's not like you need to implement PAM as maturity level 1, but as part of that journey, people go, actually, this is a really good solution. We should try to adopt this for our organization. I've got students that that sort of come through, and that is exactly what they've done. They've sort of found some good successes with it.
Louis, with some of the students that you've now delivered this, the new version of Security Plus 2, how have they found the class, and specifically, I guess, the change to the new domains? So, we've got three new domains in there: implementation, operations, and incident response, and governance, risk and compliance, and then updates to architecture and design, and attack threats and vulnerabilities, which were rolled over. Are they finding, again, like with everything that you and James have just spoken about and how, I guess, their roles are changing, does the new course actually sit well with them in terms of, they can actually relate to it, and it's going to help them in terms of what they're doing day to day within their roles?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the good things about this class is that Monday is attacks. There's some foundational stuff in there, but Monday is attacks, which sort of sets the scene as to why we do all this stuff in security. Why do we need to know the Tuesday through to Friday's content? That is one of the nice things about how this course is structured. And then once you learn that, it's like, right, let's talk about, some of the foundational things that you need to know, starting with, with cryptography, starting with, architecture, starting with, how do we design good systems? And then it flows quite naturally as it sort of goes through, and sort of ends with the why we do a lot of this stuff, and how we look at it from a sort of almost like a top-down approach, looking at it from a risk management perspective, which is what a lot of information security is sort of leaning towards. Part of it is, people come through, maybe they've got IT background, maybe they've got a support background, and they learn a lot of things, both from a knowledge perspective, but from a practical perspective, on how to achieve things they want to do now, or things for their next role, which is what a lot of people are sort of coming in for. It's not necessarily about their current job, although this definitely helps. It's about their next role, or why they're doing certain things in their current role. Certainly a lot of the different sort of topics that we go through, and it's such a broad course. A lot of the topics that we go through really do sort of set the scene and the stage for why we do what we do in information security.
Excellent. And look, on that, I might move to our next slide, because I think James also said previously, that the security role is changing, and security, I guess, it's traditionally stemmed from IT. It's grown, it's matured. There's more factors driving this change. I think just if we can just expand on what you were just talking on then, security is all about helping manage information security risks throughout the business. What are some of the driving forces of this now? We've seen, obviously, the last 18 months, businesses have had to change the way that they've worked. That a lot more businesses are now enabling a remote workforce as well.
Remote workforce has been a big deal.
Yeah, there's stories every week in the news about a ransomware attack, an attack on an abattoir, pipeline attacks in the US. There's updates to privacy regulations. But Luke, do you want to spend a bit more on this about, how you think this is really driving that change within businesses and within individuals as they try and pan out their career path as well in cyber?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to security, traditionally a lot of organizations, it probably started in IT. where someone in IT may have been responsible for, secure configurations, or, making sure that, there are certain appliances in place. But, sort of as security is evolving, we need to sort of look at, we need to look at information security outside of just IT, because we are looking at protecting information. We're looking at protecting data of our organization. And some of that is not just IT related. Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be some IT related aspects of it, but some of it is going to be physical. Some of it's going to be rules. Some of it's going to be administrative, different policies we have in place. And so, we want to look at managing information security risk throughout the entire organization, not just, what are the firewall configuration rules? What are, is our IDS properly? What do we have the nicest dashboard in our teams? There's a lot more to trying to manage risks, and we're seeing information security sort of move out of IT and more into risk management. And being able to sort of manage risk appropriately, sort of come up with a strategy for how to manage those risks, and then applying that strategy onto IT rather than sort of being part of IT. And one of the notes that I've got in the slide there is that sometimes security reports to an IT director, and there can be quite a conflict of interest if information security is reporting to IT, because IT is all about making sure we have high performance and making sure that we are able to access our data whenever we want. Whereas in Israel, they've now got a law that says, well, someone who's in charge of security needs to report to the CEO. So that way those risks are actually sort of sent and sent to the people that are meant to be accountable for those risks in the organization, rather than someone that's in IT. And this is something that I'm seeing in a lot of organizations, not a lot of the smaller ones. The smaller ones are, don't have necessarily have the resources for it, but certainly seeing some of the larger ones. James, is this something that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you talk to large organizations and they'll say, look, we feel we have a good enough relationship between IT and security to where it doesn't necessarily report up to the CEO or the board. But having said that, I've seen more organizations move up to exactly what you're saying, Louis. For example, I know some of the security function in the same way that the accounting function doesn't even report up to the CEO, reports to the board in a very large organization. Right? Because again, you're always trying to avoid that conflict of interest or that lack of communication, because security basically sets a foundation for where you want to go with your organization. So even in a very small company, let's say with 20 people in it or even fewer, an owner always wants the best foundation to start things with. And it's basically winning people over and understanding that security is not just something that you slap on at the end, or it's just an IT function or a really smart IT function. It's a smart business function. And I think that you're seeing the maturity of things growing up that way. I like this example here. I think it was Napoleon who was being told about a certain general, that this general knows all the right people. This general was educated well. This general knows how troops work and how to use them in battle and all that. And Napoleon said, supposedly, I don't really care about all that. Is this general lucky? And my point behind that is about maturity. Organizations oftentimes, in a sense, feel that they're lucky when it comes to security, but they're not really just lucky. Looking for luck is not a great tactic or a great strategy, but maturity of operations is. And I think, Louis, what you're talking about, the idea of security, it's more integrated, right? And you talk about that from a business perspective. It all speaks to the maturity of the processes and the maturity of the skills and the people that are in the organization. And in general, the more mature the organization in basically doing governance, compliance, educating people, and in really understanding how their business processes work, they're the ones that tend to be the luckiest when it comes to security issues, because they will stay away from questionable vendors. Or they will say, well, I know that's how I know that's how it's done when it comes to working with a vendor, or how it's done with a specific process, or putting a server in place or a cloud provider in place. But they say, we need to up our game a little bit. And that's what I mean by maturity of processes. I think that's really important. And that way organizations can find themselves, in a sense, lucky. It's not really luck. It's just the result of good maturity.
Absolutely. And one of the things that when it comes to sort of having that maturity is that it's very possible to have a system, set up processes and not consider security at all. In fact, we've done it for about 20 years in a lot of places. Absolutely. And we're seeing the downside, the consequences of that now over the last few years, where we sort of keep seeing a lot of different types of attacks, and a lot of them are due to errors made in the past, or a lack of assurance because you haven't gone back and checked that. Someone put into the chat, talking about the Colonial Pipeline, and where they didn't get lucky as so be, because obviously there was a lot of issues there. And from the reports that have coming out this week, it was an old password that had been leaked and reused where there wasn't multi-factor. And multi-factor is sort of becoming essential when you are utilizing VPNs. And we were talking about the Essential 8. Multi-factor for remote access is maturity level 1 for the top control there. And so, we want to make sure that, we have this, we can look at technology, but we have the rules. We have, how we do something. We have that governance. We have, make sure we are compliant with what it is that we are aligning to, whether it be Essential 8, whether it be ISO, whether it be NIST cybersecurity framework, whatever it is that we're looking to align with. We get able to do that from the top, but also make sure we are implementing it at a control level as well.
It's absolutely right. And like maturity, this also comes down to I'll bring it to a technological perspective, but it's also really an investment perspective. I think too often it's like, well, we've already bought that car. We already bought I'll use an analogy. We already bought the car. Why am I having to revisit buying the car? It's like, well, no, you're just maintaining it. We all know oil changes are important. We all know, right? You have to do various maintenance that is expensive. And sometimes it results in a new car or a new engine dropping in it. Going to the security side of things, whenever I read about whether it be pipeline attacks or the prototypical supply chain attack earlier at the beginning of this year, end of last year with SolarWinds and all that, you read notes and people will say, oh yeah, they were using a default password or whatever. And I don't know about that, but I have noticed, for example, with both the pipeline issue and SolarWinds, you take a look at the technology they were using. It's like people are saying, well, the FTP server was using a weak password or not using 2FA or whatever. But I guess my question is, FTP server? I mean, it's pretty 1995, isn't it? And my point is, people are not maturing their platforms, and you can't secure something that is that bad. It's like going in and trying to fix a car engine that's 40, 50 years old. I mean, it can be done, but why not modernize? So, and that's where that security function, talking to the owner of the company, whether it be a large company or a small one, where she can make those decisions that really move things along. And I think it's that liaison and that connection between the security worker, not just as an IT person or techie, but as a business co-owner, that's really important.
And I think probably the biggest challenge for that, because I'm pretty sure anyone that's sort of is like heard that go, well, I don't have the budget for it. And the honest answer is that is the biggest problem, is that we have to show value. Yeah. Like, how do we show? And we don't show value by going, look, this is a shinier firewall than our last one. We show value by talking to the business, by talking business. And that is moving towards the role of what information security is. Again, there's our picture on the side here. With, the time for you to sit at the big kid table. We need to talk the language of the big kids as well. We can't just talk about, how many attacks per day that our WAFs are stopping. Like no one cares about that. That's not like, that doesn't mean anything to the objectives of the organization. So, and again, one of the things that Security Plus does is it really does sort of focus that last day of talking about governance, talking about why it's important to communicate and to show value into why we do what we do, or why we need to either implement controls or replace a process or change technology or mature something. And that is where the challenge is for us, is that showing value, because we've got there's solutions out there. If you want to replace FTP, there's a bunch of solutions out there. It's about being able to convince someone that it's worth making that choice.
In what way is investing in that new thing, whatever that is, not a shiny object, or object du jour, right? But something that absolutely, gives me a better foundation, so that in the next time period, next year or whatever, I can go to sleep at night knowing that we're in pretty good shape. it's a due diligence, right? It's that kind of terminology, that kind of perspective, due diligence, maturity, as opposed to, oh yeah, this is a really groovy little, piece of technology. Nobody cares about that really from a business.
I mean, the geekiness cares, because we want to play with the new blinky box.
Sure, it's fun to play with stuff.
I'm looking forward to getting some new Ubiquity gear at some point soon. I'm really keen for it, but that's not it's not something I can convince someone else as to why we need it. It needs to actually sort of show value. Absolutely.
So we've just been talking about how the cyber professional role is changing, so it's more diverse, more integrated now. We've got the roles mind map. The next slide, so I'm sure everybody's waiting with bated breath to see what that is. Louis, I know this is a favourite of yours, and it was your suggestion we put it in. I enjoy this slide. You've shared this with me a number of times. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
And why it's a favourite of yours?
Yeah, I mean, it's a favorite of mine for lots of reasons. But I get people from a whole bunch of different areas, coming into Security Plus, or not even really my courses really, and go, I want to learn security. And I'm like, great, which direction you want to go in? And they go, I don't know. I'm like, great, let me show you a picture. That is sort of how this always gets introduced. And when we talk about security, and this is something that Security Plus does really well, is that it is so broad. And each of those broad topics has a depth. So you can choose to be a generalist and sort of cover all these, or a majority of these different points, or you can go down a path and sort of go quite deep. Now, the Security Plus course, goes the generalist route. So here's all the things that you need to know if you're going to have a foundational knowledge in information security. And that is one of the reasons why this course is absolutely fantastic, is that, it talks about why security architecture is important. It talks about network design and certain aspects of network design. It talks about identity access management and making sure we do that in a secure way. But then it looks at, risk assessment, both from a technical perspective, looking at penetration tests, vulnerability analysis, red team, blue team, etc., as well as social engineering. But then it also looks at it from a governance perspective and being able to perform audits. And that audit doesn't necessarily have to be a pen test. That audit can be, interviewing someone, going, hey, how do we do this? What about in this scenario? And sort of, being able to brainstorm situations. And then looking at it from, do we align with certain laws and regulations? Do we align with the Australian privacy law? Do we align with, we work in these other countries? Do we align with GDPR? There's talk that, a GDPR-like system might be coming to Australia soon. I'm keeping my eyes open for that one. And then, there's a whole bunch of others, especially in security operations, where, we do have to work with our tools, our appliances, with our vulnerability management, and of course with incident response. And this is something that we've got a fair bit in this course as well, is incident response. And then there's a few other things in there. So one of the things I really like about it is it really does sort of show why cybersecurity, is hard, why it is hard, because it has so many different aspects to know in this area. It's one of those areas that a lot of people in information security feel like they have imposter syndrome. Because they feel like everyone else knows everything, knows more than they do, but of course, so much more. And there will be people out there that know more in a certain topic than I do. I'm never going to deny that. I have people that come into classes with either Security Plus or others that have 20 plus years experience. I'm not going to know more than them in their niche. Never going to happen. But I'm able to sort of show them through the entire sort of journey of information security, and talk about why such different elements is important. And presumably this is something that Security Plus does quite well, James.
Yeah, we're also seeing there's so many people I talk with. For example, a person who is a compliance specialist. He basically looks at saying, okay, here's what the rules are that you said you're going to comply to, and you did business for 6 months, and now I'm going to see, are you in compliance or not? He's a former Bobby up in the UK. He's a former policeman, and he will say, "Oh, I'm not a particularly technical person, but I use Security Plus, and that got him into that particular job role." I know another person in the US is an incident response specialist. Came from the service industry, service meaning hoteliers, hotels, things like that. This person's very good at taking a crisis and then resolving it. So there's previous history that you have, and then Security Plus allows you to choose whatever pathway, to your point, Louis, you want to take.
And it really does, I guess, give you the skills that you can apply to the various roles, and depending where you're coming from. I mean, the role of the cyber professional has changed. There's often debates on LinkedIn about what is a cyber professional these days. There's so many different roles, and the slide we've just got up on the screen now actually just talks a little bit to how each of the domains might apply to the various roles. And when we look at this, we can see where it starts to complete that picture. It really does cover a number of the key areas or the skill requirements that a cyber professional is going to require throughout their career.
In a small business, if you're supporting that, you're going to wear quite a few hats. Okay. You will be the compliance specialist. Oh, I'm designing the network, and there's that. But the larger organization you get in, there's a possibility that you can then do the specialty where you say, well, I'm a network security person, or I am a, somebody who focuses on incident response. There is that possibility for specialization.
And I'm getting students now that are using sort of a lot of the new sort of security roles. So people that are actually coming through that are threat hunters. That are actually sort of looking and actively looking for indicators of compromise inside of their organization, actually sort of trying to find things going on, or people that do digital forensics. Again, these are sort of more specialized roles that we wouldn't typically put with IT. We now put them in information security, and so we are seeing a rise in these information security sort of specialized roles, particularly for people coming through my classes, but also in globally.
You can also see here why it is really, it is such a great certification for anyone starting their cyber career. It really does give them that baseline skills package all in one. And Louis, you touched on this earlier, but when it comes to learning, so with Security Plus, at DDLS, we run our 5-day instructor-led courses. So Louis, being one of our cyber technical instructors, delivers the Security Plus. With instructor-led training, you have access to content and practice questions. There's video demonstrations. I think, James, you appear on some of those videos from memory as well. Practice questions to check for understanding. So, this is all really good in not only helping you learn, help you to prepare for the exam, but it's also hands-on applied learning. And so, Louis, I might ask you to talk about this first, about the labs and the different types of labs and why they're so beneficial to this learning process, especially when preparing for the Security Plus certification, but even after the certification.
Yeah, so to talk about the learning process, I'll touch on that in just a second, but to touch on the learning process, so we obviously, like every class, we've got slides, but the slides are supplemented with a really good book, and it makes a lot of sense. I'm not really a big fan of the book that CompTIA sort of pushes out, but at the end of every chapter, there's questions. Go through questions as a class, really good, and then we have labs. And so our labs, there's 2 types of labs that are within the Security Plus course. One, which is the assisted labs, where you sort of have the sort of step-by-step, this is how you do this is how you use this technology, this is how you perform this attack, and sort of it gives you that step-by-step guide as to how to do something. And then they have applied labs, which is, okay, you've learned this, here's the applied lab, go and perform this task. Here are some questions. You have already learned how to do this. Go and learn it. And that's where the students will explore and do things right, do things wrong. But by doing things wrong, they learn how to then do them right, which is sort of one of the advantages of that. So this allows, and the good thing about the lab environment is that they can access it anywhere for 12 months. So you got 12-month access to it. So I go through, there's quite a number of labs. I don't go through all of them in the class because there's a lot of labs. But I do go through the ones that I find that are quite important for that week. And if someone wants to sort of do some more specializing learning, these labs can be spun up and blown away. They can, you can explore and experiment with these. Don't have to do it on your computer. Don't have to worry about, other environments. And it may have a bunch of things on it that you've never played around with before. So it's certainly good for that one. James, you do a lot of this stuff because obviously a lot of your, a lot of the videos that you have goes through a lot of the practical aspects of a lot of the topics we go through. Any comments on the labs for these ones?
We learn by doing as human beings generally, right? And so I remember when we first started getting into the learning side of things, we've done certifications at CompTIA for decades, right? One of the things I really push for with our CEO and with everybody saying, whatever learning resources we have to have labs. And it has to be kind of in a sense, 2-step. One, labs that will guide you through if it's a new concept for you, and then labs that basically ask you to perform. In other words, that are a bit more advanced. And we have both of those here. So hands-on practical is very important. So if you're gonna, whether it be through hackathons and things like that, competitions, we work with the NCL, for example. We work with a lot of folks. But it's the labs to me that get it get people ready. And I talk with hiring managers every day in the industry, and they're all about hands-on learning, because that is what gets muscle memory going. It's not just rote memory.
It's also a great way to ensure you don't break your company's systems trying something out as well.
Well, the labs are great. I call them safe sandboxes, because you can mess around in there, right? And then if there's a problem, like you didn't learn something, or a problem that you actually broke something, you just restart the
Restart it,
virtual,
do it again,
and you're ready to go again.
I've had students in other classes, not this one, where they've downloaded something that it's supposed to have malware in it, because that's what we're learning at the time, and their computer, they get locked out of their computer because they downloaded malware to the computer. They had to call the support desk in order to get access to it, because yeah, exactly right. I was like, don't download it to your work laptop. That's not the right place for downloading malware. Definitely put in some sort of sandbox. And this is again another sort of great example of why we want to have something like that.
You heard that here first, folks. Don't download malware to your work laptop.
This is sort of lessons you have here.
It is. It is. And so
who would ever do such a thing? I've never done that before.
Yeah.
With this hands-on learning, it helps prepare for the exam as well. So the exam is multiple choice. It also has performance-based questions. And so, James, do you just want to touch on the performance-based questions quickly before we move to the next slide, and why they're so important as part of the certification process?
It basically speaks to credibility. We want to test people's muscle memory, test people's ability to do this. And so you will see, linear questions, they're called, or ABCD type questions. Sure. You'll also see performance-based questions where you'll be placed into an environment and asked to perform a certain task to complete it. Might be more than one way to do it. And the idea being that we really want to really validate that you have actually done this thing in a physical way, and that it's really part of what you do, because that's very much what industry needs right now.
Excellent. And so if we're talking the exam and the certifications, I've put up CompTIA's certification pathway here. So for professionals who have done Security Plus, there's a couple of pathways they can go. If they want to go down the cyber pathway, the next courses would be the cybersecurity analyst, which for those listening, James will be joining myself and Terry Griffin, who's our cybersecurity analyst technical instructor, in August. We'll be discussing that course separately. And there's pen test and there's CASP. But for those maybe as well who are thinking about doing Security Plus but aren't sure if they're ready, A+ and Network Plus are a very good pathway to get there as well.
We definitely focus on that, on all of our pathways, and people will focus on the cybersecurity pathway. It starts with Security Plus, then you can move into pen testing, red team, blue team, CYSA, and then advanced networking. But I would argue that the infrastructure pathway is part of the cybersecurity pathway, that they're all very closely related. So with A+, people will say, well, that's help desk, tech service, service techs and all that. Networking is for networking pros. I get it, but you can't be a good security person unless you understand your endpoints. And endpoints is what A+ is all about, whether it be Linux systems, Windows systems, IoT, it's all in there. And if you don't know how all those endpoints get put together through networking, whether it be through networking protocols, IPv4, IPv6, the whole suite, routing protocols, all that fun stuff, you can't be a proper security person with that. So, and I would also argue, as you get into security, Linux is a huge deal, because Linux happens to be what most things are based on these days, whether it be the cloud or a lot of the pen testing, a lot of the analytics tools and things are all based on Linux. So there are so many different, there's kind of a suite of, you could argue, skills that you need to bring in. And that's why this pathway-based approach is so important to consider.
Excellent. Thank you. So look, that brings us to the end of the discussion today. Before we move to questions, James, any final thoughts on the new Security Plus?
You bet. When it comes to Security Plus, remember those objectives are out there. You can grab them pretty quickly, pretty easily. I always like to see the objectives of any cert. I don't care if it's certs outside of CompTIA or CompTIA certs. Those objectives, when they're done right, are basically the distilled wisdom of thousands, literally thousands of working IT pros. And think about those objectives as basically a mentor. When I think all of us have had mentors, right, Louis? I remember one of my first mentors is a person, he's working at a major retailer right now. And he wasn't then, but I just watched him move on up. It's very important to have those mentors physically, but if you can't get a physical mentor yet, you've got those objectives that will teach you what's right, what's wrong, what's important, and what's not. So there's a thought.
Yeah, one of my first mentor was one of the people who wrote the 802.1x standard. He's
Cool.
the guy, no, big grey beard, and it was he stepped me through a lot of the pitfalls that I fell into on my security path, which is good. He helped me out of a lot of those. But one of the things that I really like about pretty much all the CompTIA classes is that I one of the first things I bring up on Monday is, let's have a look at the objectives. Here is the 20-page document this is all the stuff we're going to be looking at and you're going to be assessed on and that you will want to know. And it's a really good document. It's very rarely do I bring up a good objective document, and CompTIA always has good ones. So it's certainly one of the things that I like to bring up at the beginning of every one of my sort of Security Plus classes. So I completely agree with what you're saying there.
And anyone listening in, work with DDLS, work with, Louis, Jeremy, with anybody, and say, here's some areas that I'd like to get, into, and they will counsel you for the best pathway, whatever that pathway is. We need more workers, whether, inside or outside of CompTIA, doesn't matter to me. What does matter to me is that you get the skills that you need in order to enter the workforce.
Thank you, James. And Louis, I guess, as you're delivering this class, you're talking to the students. Your thoughts on the new Security Plus? If someone's thinking about doing it, your advice?
Yeah, so I've had students both in Security Plus, but starting off with sort of outside of Security Plus, where they've gone, okay, I've learned this hacking class, I've learned these things. Do I need to do Security Plus? Do I need to do that? And then my questions then go, okay, do you know when we want to encrypt with a private key versus encrypting with a public key? No. Okay. Do you know what an IDS and an IPS is? No. Do you know the 4 forms of risk treatment? No. It's like, well, if you keep answering no to these, you need to go and do Security Plus, because that's going to give you and fill in all those sort of foundational security gaps that there are certain areas that you will have on your job and certain areas that you've never seen before, because something that is, again, this is quite a broad sort of a course. So having the knowledge, having the book, having the labs, having the videos, having the certification is something that I think pretty much anyone who wants to get into cybersecurity should have. Excellent.
And as James said before, if you have questions out there, if you're unsure about the right courses, or what courses you want to put your staff through, reach out to Louis and myself or any of the team at DDLS. We're always happy to assist. So look, we've got time for some questions. So Michelle, have we had any questions come through?
I'll have a look now. Just bring it up. So if you haven't already asked a question, you can do so in the control panel. So the first question we've got here is, if I'm looking for a career in cyber, but not sure where to start, what can you recommend?
One of the first things that you could do, if you want, you can go in and take a look at some of the career advisory pages and apps that we've put together at CompTIA. You can take a look at that, and it basically will ask you questions, and you'll also be able to do some reading, and then you can look, and then you can get a result from that. The other thing, again, I would contact folks at DDLS and ask those questions, and you can get some very good career advice that way as well.
I've actually just had one. It's not a question, but I think it's a bit of feedback, and I'll give Louis a plug here. Louis just said he's done the Security Plus with Louis. Great trainer, by the way. So that's great, Louis. She said, how to maintain your current skill set, latest threat knowledge, if cybersecurity is not your primary job role. So where could someone go for that? Louis, what would you suggest?
I mean, part of it really is that initial sort of Security Plus to sort of get that, because a lot of what the question that's being asked there is, how do I fill in the gaps? How do I fill in the gaps of what I'm missing? But then how do I get the latest information? And so those are always the two biggest challenges in security, is having that sort of knowledge, and then also sort of okay, what's happened this week, what's happened today. So obviously I run Security Plus, but I use Twitter for a lot of my sort of threat intelligence, and for keeping up to date as to what is sort of new and upcoming. You're basically keeping your finger on the pulse, because there's a number of things that sort of come in. Best practices are sort of evolving. We get guidance from a number of different places, but if cybersecurity is not your primary job role and you want to sort of stay up to date in cybersecurity, my advice there is to get into a cybersecurity role. So that way that becomes the 40-hour a week thing that you do rather than the 2-hour thing a week that you do. Obviously the accumulative benefits of doing 40 hours a week rather than 2 is going to add up very quickly.
One thing that
James,
you do, one thing you do to keep current, it's not quite what you're asking. I don't think is how to maintain your, well, you're saying how to keep your current skill set. One of the things that I would do is part of, if you get Security Plus certified, you have to maintain that, right? You have to do continuing education. And there are a couple of different ways you can do that. You can attend webinars and things like that, or you can take the CompTIA's CE, the CompTIA's CE course, which does a very nice job of bridging not only what you should have learned or have learned already, but also showing, new skills and things like that. So that's one way to go about doing that. I would also take a look at various forums, various publications out there that are security focused. Security Today, for example. There are various really good forums out there and really good web resources that do a great job of showing you a lot about the latest trends. I'll see if I can throw a couple of those in the chat window.
So we have 2 more questions, and these will be the last 2 because we're running out of time. The first one is, I've started in cyber, understand a few concepts and frameworks that my firm is using. Is CompTIA Security Plus the first one to start with on the certification path?
I would argue it's, if you're ready for security, it is a fantastic gateway into the world of cybersecurity. It's basically, let's put it this way, it's de facto recognized around the world that way. I see that when I'm talking to banks in India, when I talk to the DoD in the US, or in the UK that talk to the retailing industry. All of them basically say, look, you start there. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think that the stat we put up at the start, just with the number of professionals who have actually achieved a Security Plus, it is by far, one of the most popular baseline foundational cyber certifications that you can earn. And the last question we've got here is, I'd like to work in governance and risk. What is the best pathway for this?
Great question. I would say, again, of course, I'm going to say Security Plus, right? Because there's a whole section in there, and we're on a few that really focus in on that. That gives you not only a governance, risk, and compliance, but also brings in 4 other domains that contextualizes what the heck that even means in the first place, what you're governing and what you're complying to. So I think that is a great way to start out. Louis?
And we get some students that come through that maybe they've got they want to get into auditing, or they want to get into something along those lines, but their main background isn't technology, and so they're trying to understand what is supposed to be best practices, or they're a manager and they want to sort of talk to security people, and they go, I want to know when someone is talking BS to me. They want us to sort of have that knowledge, so that way they can sort of use that when applying the practice they already know. So this person wants to sort of get into sort of governance and risk. They're certainly one of the major aspects that we look at in information security is managing risk, information risk management. But it's hard to do that if you don't understand the attacks, if you don't understand the impacts, if you don't understand the controls, if you don't understand the why we have controls, if you don't understand why certain technologies don't exist. And so we can sort of, have, loose sort of control categories, but in order to manage it effectively and to have the right conversations, to ask the right questions, Security Plus gives that foundation knowledge from the technology perspective, and then also talks about how we integrate GRC, with a lot of that technology, with a lot of, information risk management for an organization.
And that also becomes a cultural thing. In other words, you start with Security Plus and it gives you a lot of that. And then whatever business culture you're in, they might say, well, we're going the ISACA route. They're highly respected in the auditing and compliance, side of things, for example. I'm just mentioning, and others might say, well, no, we're not going with that. We're going with something like, I don't know about TOGAF, but we're going with some other, provider. But once you get to know the people and the company culture, then you'll know which is the best pathway to take after you've gotten the essentials with Security Plus under your belt.
And some people go from the risk management sort of ISO 31000 perspective, because they actually sort of look at risk management holistically. And some people go down some organizations go down the the risk management framework from NIST, and there's a number of places exactly so to speak your point there, which you need to look at the culture of how risk and governance is managed at your organization to sort of figure out how to integrate that. Or again, if you want to sort of learn the backing, the technology behind it, Security Plus is a good sort of course for that.
Yeah, there's the ISACA C risk, for example, there's the CRGC. There's so many of them out there. ITIL even, does a few things along those lines. So,
That's some good suggestions. All right, well, look, that brings us to the end of today's webinar. James, Louis, I can't thank you enough for your time. I think it's been a fantastic discussion today. Some good things discussed. If anyone would like to reach out to James, Louis, or myself, you can find all three of us on LinkedIn, or you can contact us via DDLS with the details on screen now. Thanks very much for joining us today, and I'll hand over to Michelle to close out.
Thank you for everyone taking the time and joining us today. I want to say a special thank you to Jeremy, James, and Louis for that very informative and engaging webinar. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.